So here we are. I have a swatch. So this is swatching part 2. So I've just laid out a swatch here, and you'll notice that I've got two darning needles or tapestry needles in the fabric. So really high-tech measuring device. And I used my trusty ruler to measure out where 4 inches was. So most swatches are gauge indicators. Use 4 inches or 10 centimeters of fabric to count your stitches. And in this case, this is no different. So I'm counting the stitches between 4 inches of fabric. So I measured out where the 4 inches are. So if you look here, this is pointing towards me, unfortunately. So it's upside down for you. But I'm counting the V's as I go along here. So I know that this row of stitches right here is the first V in the 4 inches. So I'm going to count. I'm using another tapestry needle just to keep track because your eyes start to play tricks on you. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 stitches for 4 inches. So now I just want to mark down what I found. So 16 stitches equals 4 inches. So I'm keeping this piece of paper and we'll see what the next thing is. For most patterns, the row gauge is not as important as the stitch gauge most of the time, because most patterns basically say knit until you reach a certain length. But we will do the row gauge on this as well, just so you can see how that's done. Okay, so now I've done the same thing. I've measured out 4 inches, and I've placed my tapestry needles in a 4-inch spread, and I'm going to count the number of rows that I'm getting for 4 inches. And luckily this fabric is a little bit variegated, so I do know when I had my ruler over the top that this little darker stitch here is actually right on 4 inches. So I'm going to count. Same thing using my tapestry needle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. So 28 rows to 4 inches. Okay, so now I know that the width gauge is 16 stitches to 4 inches, and the length or the vertical gauge will be 28 rows to 4 inches. So in this particular garment, that's the row gauge that I have in the stitch gauge. So now what's quite helpful is to figure out how many stitches you have per inch. And we're going to talk about why that's important. And the next segment will show you why. So if I just do my math, I have 16 stitches to 4 inches. So lovely, this fabric just happened to work out to be divisible by 4. So that gives me 4 stitches per inch. Okay, so we have 16 stitches equals 4 inches for the gauge in the width. And 16 divided by 4 equals 4. So 4 stitches equals 1 inch. So every 4 stitches that we knit with this needle size and this yarn is going to give us 1 inch of fabric. Now when we look at the row gauge, we had 28 rows in 4 inches. So 28 divided by 4 equals 7. So we know we have 7 rows equals 1 inch. So 28 rows divided by 4 inches equals 7 rows in 1 inch. So we know every time we knit 7 rows, we're going to build 1 inch of fabric in length. So those are the two parameters and the things that you get out of your gauge swatch for gauge. And as we talked about in the last episode, that you also can get the quality of your fabric and so forth. And just to emphasize, this is a washed and blocked swatch, And the question came up in the Ravelry thread, whether you pin your swatch to match a measurement. And my answer to that would be no, that you should pin your swatch to however big the fabric naturally goes to. So if you stretch out the fabric and then pin it to try to fit a measurement, if you're stretching it too much, your fabric will over time have a tendency to go back, because of the elasticity of most of the yarns that we're using, to go back to its natural state. So you don't want to kind of over manipulate the fabric just to get some kind of a measurement. You should pin it out so it's flat and let it dry completely, and then that's your gauge. The only thing that I'll make a note about is when you're blocking lace, you do want to stretch it out, but that's to open up all of the holes that you've made for your lace fabric to make sure that you can say, and lace will stay open because it's not the actual yarn itself that you're stretching, you're just stretching the fabric to open up the spaces in between the stitches. So those are the two types of fabric that you're making mostly. So I think that's it for this part. And then the next episode, I'm going to tell you what you can do with this information if you get a gauge that doesn't match the pattern and the yarn that you want to knit with.